Good evening. I'd like to call tonight's November 19th meeting of the Board of Santa Barbara Harbor Commissioners to order. Ms. Przinski, would you call roll, please?
Yes, Bill Spicer.
Here.
Jim Sloan. Here. Betsy Kramer. Here. Stephen McIntosh.
Here.
Dennis Power.
Here.
Helene Webb. Here. And Corey Bantolin will be absent tonight.
Okay. Mr. Reedman, any changes to tonight's agenda?
Mr. Chair, no changes tonight.
Okay. At this time, we open it up to public comment on anything that's not on the agenda, and I believe Mr. Perez would like to speak. Please join us.
Hello, good evening.
Good evening.
Commissioner Spicer, Commissioner, and waterfront staff. My name is Jerry Perez. I wanted to come this evening personally to thank the Harbor Patrol, especially Officer Carl Helemichek and Tim Siciliano for saving my life. On October 22nd, I took my small skiff out to go fishing off the coast. I was near the blue barge when a large boat came by and swamped the skiff. I fell overboard. Although I had a life preserver with me, I was not wearing it. I struggled for a long time to get back into the skiff, but was unable to, and I really thought I was going to die. I estimated I was in the water for about an hour and a half and was losing consciousness. Luckily, a gentleman in another boat saw me in the water and called the Harbor Patrol. The teamwork and speed of the officers saved my life. The doctor told me another 5 to 10 minutes in the water and I would have not made it. I come here this evening grateful to be alive and thankful for the training and the dedication of the Harbor Patrol, especially the officers who saved me. Thank you.
Mr. Perez, thank you very much for that story, filling us in. Oh. Again, our thanks. That's great to hear the actual feet on the street stories of what the men and women of the Harbor Patrol and everybody who's a first responder go through. So thank you. I am moved. I will close the public comment. We move to approval of the minutes. Entertain a motion.
I'll move to approve the minutes.
Second.
All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any abstentions or nays?
I'm abstaining.
Yeah, abstain.
Get those? Okay. Okay, we are now at the director's report. Mr. Reedman.
Well, good evening, Mr. Chair, Commissioners. Since we last met, the Council approved a 5-year lease agreement with the National Park Service, Channel Islands National Marine Sanctuary, and the Santa Barbara Maritime Museum for a 547-square-foot visitor center located on the 3rd floor of the Waterfront Center building at 113 Harbor Way. And if you ever get a chance, go on up there. It's the best view of the harbor that in town and real well-kept secret. Additionally, the Council approved a 5-year lease agreement with Bob Meyer for 218-square-foot office located on the 2nd floor at 125 Harbor Way, number 12, at a rate of $538 per month, subject to annual cost of living increases. Just a small office space for the fuel dock, longtime fuel dock manager. A note about the recent council election on November 3rd. The first phase of the city district, the new city district election, was held on Tuesday, November 3rd for District 1, which is the east side, District 2, which is the Mesa, and District 3, which is the west side. Jason Dominguez was elected in District 1, and current council members Randy Rouse and Kathy Murillo were elected to District 2 and 3, respectively. Although the harbor and most waterfront jurisdiction falls within District 2, the Mesa District, the parking lots east of Stearns Wharf fall within District 1. The parking lots Palm Park, Garden Street, Cabrillo East, and Cabrillo West. Additionally, we're uncertain at this time. It appears that the the drawings we have show District 1 and District 2 splitting right down the middle of Stearns Wharf. So I don't suppose it means much because we don't have any registered voters out there on Stearns Wharf living out there as far as we know. But it is kind of interesting way they drew the map. So department managers are scheduled to conduct an orientation with Council-elect Jason Dominguez in early December. And tentative items for the agenda meeting will be a lease with John Payne doing business as Ocean Air, and a lease with Jacques Bertrand, who's been the longtime operator of the Harbor Mail Center. And that concludes my report, unless there are any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Reedman? Commissioner McIntosh.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Reedman, for your report. I just wanted to get an idea of what the lease payments are for the National Marine Sanctuary lease, the 5-year lease.
Good question. That's come up before, and I should have pointed it out. The lease payments are zero. This is it's a even trade for they pay to operate the visitor center, and we donate the space.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? All right. Thank you, Scott. Appreciate it. Business Services Report. Mr. Bossy.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. 2 quick items on your Business Services Report for this month. The first is the announcement of for the 7th consecutive year, the Waterfront Department is working with the Stearns Wharf Business Association to bring a 25-foot Christmas tree to the shoreward finger of the wharf. This is sponsored by the Stearns Wharf Business Association, who generously pays for the tree, and Waterfront staff will coordinate the installation, including the lighting, the decorating of the tree, and its delivery and placement via a crane. This will take place on Monday, November the 24th, so coming up here, and the tree will be on display until through the first week of January. I should also let you know, we'll follow up with this. There will be an official tree lighting on December the 1st, where Honorable Mayor Helene Schneider will be doing the lighting of the tree, and there will be the Providence High School Choir will be strolling around the wharf as well. So that's a new twist to it, and we're happy to see the Stearns Wharf Business Association take that on. Next is a cruise ship update. Next Friday, November the 27th, will mark the 14th and final cruise ship of the fall season. And these ships frequent Santa Barbara, as you know, on the non-peak months of the year, generally between April and May, as well as late September through late November. The routes typically vary from 4-day California cruises coming out of the Los Angeles area all the way up to 10-day cruises that take folks all the way up to Vancouver, Canada. It's an important component of our local business economy. Again, it's in those shoulder seasons where things kind of settle out, so it helps keep people afloat. Generally, between 2,000 and 3,000 passengers come on those ships. It varies depending on the size of the ship. So this year we anticipate this fall season, about 32,000 additional visitors to not to Stearns Wharf, well, hopefully to Stearns Wharf, but to the waterfront and downtown. Our parking staff, Cesar Barrios and his staff, work really closely with the Chamber of Commerce, Visit Santa Barbara and Downtown Santa Barbara, and Dominique Samario handles all the coordination of the actual space and keeps people moving in and off, and people love to come here. They say this is their favorite place to get off the ship. It's so well coordinated and easy to get to where they need to go. So the spring cruise ship schedule is currently being finalized, and we're looking at about 15 cruise ships for the spring season as well. So that concludes the business services report, and I'm happy to answer any questions if you have them.
Commissioner Kramer, question.
Hi, thank you for the report. I'm wondering if perhaps in a subsequent meeting in January at some point, you could give a report on how much money is brought in by the cruise ships. I know you have presented that to us before, but there are always comments and questions about how much money they bring in, or if they bring in any at all. So it would be helpful.
I'd be happy to do that.
Thank you.
Commissioner Power.
Thank you again for your report. Do we have any indication for next year whether there will be a significant increase or decrease in number of requests of cruise ships coming in?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Power, I would We're kind of at a good level right now between the 12 and 15 mark, and that's generally where we settle. We don't like to have ships come on the weekend. We try to avoid things like Wednesdays during wet Wednesdays. With all the constraints and with the cruise ship lines trying to figure out their routes and whatnot, it generally falls between that 12 and 15 number, and that's something we've generally been comfortable with. So we have no indication of an uptick in that. I think we're comfortable with that number, and if it were to exceed that, I think we'd need to have some talks.
Is that 12 to 15 per year or per season?
I'm sorry, that's 12 to 15 per season. So generally anywhere from 23, 24 to 30 on a big year.
Would you say that the cruise lines would like to bring more cruise ships in, and the restriction would be at our end, or is that just not happening right now?
Question.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Power, we haven't found them to be after us for more dates. I think we slide right into a number of their slots just fine. We're not like a lot of the other cities they stop at where they have an actual place to pull up, dock, and disembark. It's a little bit different here where they have to be ferried in from the ships. So I think for now they're pleased with their current situation, and they haven't been asking for more.
One final question. Based on Commissioner Kramer's request for a financial update whenever you get that numbers, I'm aware that it's quite beneficial to the waterfront department. I've heard unsubstantiated conversation that many of the nonprofit organizations, some of the restaurants, commercial organizations, don't feel that they're seeing any economic benefit. And while I'm not taking that at all as a criticism of the cruise ships, I think they're a fine idea. I'm wondering if in your report you could find out any either anecdotal or factual information on the attitude by the Downtown Association, Chamber of Commerce, whatever it might be, that might get a read on that. I'd like to be able to counter it if it's not true, but it'd be interesting to know. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Power, I believe about a year and a half or so ago, Visit Santa Barbara did put together a study and looked at that, so I can bring that information to you. I know that the downtown organization, the Chamber, and those, as well as Visit Santa Barbara, love the cruise ships. This brings, and you'll see in the report, millions of dollars to the downtown businesses. So that is a plus. I think and it's interesting. It depends on the demographic of the particular cruise ship, because each cruise ship is a little bit different, and the groups that go on it are a little bit different. But sometimes you'll see folks who really like to go out there and spend the money and go to the restaurants and go to the stores. Others, you'll see a little bit different focus. It may not be all on the purchasing of things. Some ships, a lot of people end up on Stearns Wharf. Some cruise ships, they gravitate more towards State Street. So it's an interesting blend of folks, but we can get you all the information that we have as far as economic benefit to folks.
Thank you, Brian. Cruise ships always a hot topic. Move to facility management report. Mr. Treiberg.
Good evening, Chair Spicer and Commissioners. It's that time of the year again to begin dredging of the Federal Channel. Pacific Dredge assumed the contract, the Corps of Engineers dredging contract from AIS last year. They're under a 3-year contract they're in the final year of a 3-year contract with the Corps of Engineers. Pacific Dredge, as you can see, it's slightly different looking than it was. They took it down to San Diego and retrofitted it. It's red and white now. Hear that? And cleaned up a bit. It's a new operation. The Pacific Dredge, it's a subsidiary of Pacific Tug Services, which is a rather large company down in San Diego, so we're looking forward to working with them. They started mobilization last week. They put the dredge yard up on West Beach. They're installing a lot of the dredge pipeline, some of the floating pipeline, and some of the buried pipeline. And the discharge area will be down by the Cabrillo Ball Fields, which is sort of the furthest east that they normally discharge. And this really helps re-nourish the beach down by the Cabrillo Bathhouse in those areas. The schedule is to begin dredging around December 2nd or 3rd. It'll probably finish long before Christmas. That's the plan. Last year, they dredged the 120,000 cubic yards that's allowed under the contract in less than 10 days. So they've made a lot of improvements to the dredge, where their efficiency and reliability has improved considerably. So we're looking forward to that. There's $2.76 million in the President's FY 2016 budget for this year. Congress just approved a 2-year budget that includes this, but we don't know what the budget is for 2017, although we've received some assurances that we'd be in that as well. This is a little bit more money than we normally get. They're updating the environmental assessment for the whole dredging program this year. They've also taken some sediment samples, and they're going to let a new 3-year contract next summer. So there's room in the budget for all of that, and the 120,000 cubic yards for this cycle and the spring cycle, which will complete this 3-year contract. Our next project has to do with West Beach sand management. The waters off West Beach are the quiet water area that's sheltered by the breakwater itself, but it's not officially inside of the harbor. It's used by swimmers, paddlers, small sailboats, and it's a very, very popular area. Unfortunately, it accretes sand in southeast conditions, kind of an unusual condition that we get before a lot of fronts that move through in the wintertime. And what happens is the sand moves the opposite direction, kind of up coast. It accumulates off West Beach, and there's no natural means to move that sand back off the beach. So over the years, especially when it's not removed, it really, really builds up. Whenever we get an opportunity to remove some of this sand, we try to take advantage of it. In 2010, we were contacted by the Santa Barbara County Parks Department to use some of the West Beach sand up at Goleta Beach Park. A lot of you have heard about Goleta Beach Park. It's been in the news quite a bit regarding the erosion up there and threatened to some of the recreational resources. Back in 2010, 2 methods were used. There was trucking, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a minute, and also a floating barge where they loaded some offshore sand into a barge and then steamed their way up there and discharged it onto the beach. It was quite an operation, but very, very expensive. West Beach always has a surplus of sand. I don't know that we could ever dredge it back to what we call our ideal contours as identified in our permit for this kind of work. It's called the Sediment Management Plan. The county parks right now is looking for about 20,000 cubic yards. We recently completed some sediment sampling, which is a requirement for any project like this. With the project funding by the county, the rest of the permit processing and the project itself, the trucking of the sand, would be funded by the county. But just by way of kind of identifying what they do is what happens, the ideal way is to move into the intertidal area at the lowest of tides, and they use an excavator, which is a pretty efficient means of removing sand, and they deepen that area and load it into trucks, and then they just move it a couple hundred feet up onto the beach, and they create a stockpile. Then they load street trucks and truck it all the way up to Goleta Beach. It's by far the most efficient and cost-effective way of doing it. 20,000 yards is quite a bit of sand to move, and it takes several weeks to move that amount, if they move that much indeed. Goleta Beach Park, they're going to start some work up there at the end of December, and they're not quite sure when they're going to need this sand. It could be this winter, and it's a possibility that they'll do some beach nourishment on their own with sand that's up there, let the winter roll through and see if there's any left, and then come up in the spring and use some of the West Beach sand to re-nourish that beach so that they'll have a beach all summer long. We'll update the Harbor Commission, boaters, slip holders, and other tenants down there to let them know if this project's going to happen. It's kind of in development right now, but the county seems pretty serious about this. So we'll be back in front of you with this project before too long. And our final project this evening is the 6th phase of the 8-phase Marina One replacement project. Bellingham Marine Industries was awarded a contract for phases 5 through 8. They completed phase 5 last year very, very quickly. The project is pretty simple at this stage with them having completed the previous 5. It's scheduled to begin right after New Year's on January 4th. There's 3 main tasks: demolition of the old docks, starting with H-Finger, which takes 2 or 3 days. And normally they bring in new docks immediately, so dock installation takes another couple of weeks at the most, with utility installation, which is really kind of the most tedious part of the project, happening shortly thereafter. The entire project last year took about 6 weeks, which was really quick. It was the fastest by far. That included vessel relocation. With respect to vessel relocation, all the vessels on H and I finger, the two fingers we'll be working on this year, are located one finger at a dock, H finger, within the Santa Barbara Harbor, so they don't have to go to Ventura or Channel Islands Harbor. But what that does is that takes up all the transient berthing, not just the transient berthing that the city owns and operates, but also the temporary cancellations for folks that are in Mexico or Hawaii or in the boatyard or doing other things. The problem with that is it's great for those being relocated, but the problem is there's almost no berthing for transient boaters, people moving up and down the coast. And this year we're especially concerned with the storms forecast, which I'll talk about in a little bit, that the folks out in the anchorage, we really encourage them to come in during storms, and it's going to be tough to find places to put them. But we looked at this when we started this project, and we can raft boats up, we can put them on side ties. So we've made it through 5 phases so far. All 5 phases, there wasn't a single day that was very bad with respect to storms. We had some storms, but nothing like we're expecting this year. So we'll have to work hard to accommodate transient boaters. The bid amount for this phase is $1.496 million. That includes a 5% change order authority. Last year we did have some change orders related to improving some of the water utilities, but all the previous phases we had very, very few. Bellingham's a pretty well-oiled machine, so we don't expect a lot of changes. This is all funded by a loan from the Division of Boating and Waterways we've talked about over the years. It's a total of $14 million. I think after this phase we get up to about $9 or $10 million in loan funds, and we'll update you on that as we have during budget proceedings in the past regarding debt service and everything else. That concludes my report this evening, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Trybrook?
Thank you for your report, and also thank you for berthing the boats in the harbor, how difficult that is, and I'm sure everyone will work with you getting it if we have storms this year. So, thanks.
Commissioner Power.
Yes, Carl, 2 questions about sand removal, and I may have missed this, but was the blue outlined area in your first slide, does that indicate the approximately 20,000 cubic yards of sand that's going to be removed? In other words, could one look at the beachfront being back at the northernmost line there?
Chair Spicer, Commissioner Power, more or less, it probably wouldn't go quite as far to the west as that, and not quite as far over towards the Stearns Wharf as that. This particular photograph was taken at a relatively low tide. We try not to move the beach too far back because this is the fireworks pad for 4th of July and Parade of Lights, so we are sensitive to that. And that's why we work in the intertidal zone. So everything will be done below the mean high water mark. But that in general represents about where we'd be able to get that volume of sand from.
Thank you. My second question is, will the removal and transport of sand be at the expense of the city of Goleta or some other entity, or do we get involved in that?
It'll be at the expense of the county of Santa Barbara. And the only thing we've paid for is the sediment sampling. That was about $10,000, and we kind of knew something might be coming, especially on a big year like this. It's nice to have the sediment sampling done in advance in case somebody wants the sand or there's an opportunity to remove it, because it's a tremendous value back to us to have somebody else remove the sand as opposed to us conducting and paying for the operations ourselves.
Being the creative enterprise zone that I know you are, I'm surprised you didn't try to sell them the sand. But it's just
Selling sand at the beach. Any other questions for Mr. Trybrook? Thank you, Carl. Harbor Operations Report, Mr. Cronman.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. Well, for the 3rd year in a row, we had about 14,000 people show up for our Harbor and Seafood Festival on the 17th of October. It seems to be the carrying capacity is parking, and that works out pretty well for us, too, because that's just about the number of people the event can handle. I'm sure if we had more parking, that 14,000 could turn into 30,000, which might overwhelm the festival. And it was full capacity. It was a great time was had by all, sort of like last year's report. If you liked last year, I'm sure you liked this year's Harbor Festival. Lobster, crab, sea urchin, oysters, uni, mussels, barbecued albacore, fish and chips, clam chowder, paella. We had it all again. We had the boat rides. We had the nonprofits on the city pier. It was a wonderful success. I mean, I really don't know how best to say it. And rather than bore you with a lot of more words, I would just like to show you some of the photos that Dominique Samario took during the day. I don't know how she did it. She was so busy, but she found the time to take some pictures, and this says a lot more than I could. This is the albacore fillets early in the day. Started to cook albacore fillets. You can see the oak wood in the background. These are always a huge hit. The albacore line really never goes to zero. People are always in line for this. Talked to a lot of people during the day, and a lot of them said that, they're return customers, and they come and hungry, and they eat food all day, and they usually stop at the albacore booth. This is fishermen selling direct to the public, lobster and crab. This is fairly early in the day. Things are just getting started, but as you can see, a lot of customers and very, very slick operations. These fishermen have really got it down to a science as to how they keep the fish fresh, live, in the case of the lobsters and crabs, and displayed in a way that's very enticing for the public. Early in the day still, City Pier still starting to fill up, if you will. As you can see, pop-ups are popular. The fishermen really needed to protect their product. The nonprofits, you can see them at the top of the slide on the north side of the wharf. I've come to realize over the years the best way to separate these is to do it the way you see here so that we don't have pop-up versus pop-up. And that really necks things down where it's difficult for people to travel. So everybody seems to be happy with this layout, and it's what we'll stick with moving forward. The catch of the day, of course, lobsters. We figured a lot of red in this picture would look nice. This individual sold pretty close to 1,000 pounds of lobster that day, and ran out at like 3 o'clock. So it was a good day for some of the fishermen. Where can you get fresh uni? Right from the sea urchin. Well, right there on the City Pier. And this is what it looked like. Folks were lined up for a long ways to get this. It's a great value-added product for the fishermen to be able to sell. An animal that, goes for 50 cents to $1 a pound when you have 2,000 pounds of it and it's loaded on the truck, cracked and eviscerated like this for the customers, sold for $10 an urchin. So it was a great day for the folks engaged in that. Maricultured abalone, those are not wild-caught abalone illegally. Those are maricultured abalone. They sold fast like everything else. Boat rides, now the sun has come out, so I can tell you it's probably 11 o'clock by now. The Double Dolphin and the Celebration, we're very busy all day, taking people on free boat rides. Who doesn't want to go on a free boat ride, right? You can tell these people are having a great time. This is a typical shot of folks sitting at the table eating their seafood. The tables were overflowing with seafood. It's just a thrill, quite frankly, since our harbor is a working harbor, to see people enjoying the fruits of labor from our fishing fleet on any day, but especially on Harbor Festival Day. I honestly think people know when it's coming. They lock it into their calendars, and they come on down. Here is the famous paella pan. This dish in particular may have been among the most popular at the entire Harbor Festival. The line was long, but it was well worth it, and folks raved about the paella as they do most years. So that concludes my report on this part of the Harbor Operations report, and I want to talk now about the Parade of Lights coming up, if you will, going from one event to the other. So by now, all slip permittees should have received their registration forms for the Parade of Lights on Sunday evening, December 6th. This year, not only because the event takes place on the eve of Pearl Harbor Remembrance Day, but also because we're going to have the awards party at the Veterans Building, and a lot of veterans are interested in participating in this event. We sort of did I wouldn't say a 180, but certainly a diversion from our normal themes of Twinkle Star and lights in the holidays and silver bells and what have you. And we're actually making this an event that honors our veterans, past and present. And so we've switched this year's theme to a red, white, and blue holiday. And we expect there to be, we already have, upwards of 10 people who've signed up for this event, and a lot of them have indicated their themes are right in line with what we're promoting here. And so there's going to be, the typical parade at 5:30-ish, and followed by a awards party at the Veterans Memorial Building. There will be some veterans there. We invite the boaters who participate in this, and this is sort of an enticement for boaters to join. The boaters who participate in this parade are going to get to meet some really special people over at the Veterans Building. The event will be catered by the Waterfront Grill Endless Summer Bar Cafe, and it's going to be decorated to the hilt in red, white, and blue fashion. But after the parade, right after the parade, before the awards ceremony, we'll have a short fireworks show brought to us care of Garden State Fireworks, the same folks who brought us the July 4th show. They did a great job, and we expect more of the same from them. And so, once again, I'd like to repeat that to be able to go to the awards party, you should be in the parade, okay? This isn't, as special as this is, we expect it could be very popular among folks who want to come to the Veterans Building and celebrate at the awards party. But this is especially for the folks who sign up and participate in the parade. And the veterans, a special group of veterans, care of the folks who manage the Veterans Memorial Building, have been invited. And we look forward to an extremely unique event. But don't forget, starting at 3 o'clock, and this is for the families especially, we'll have the traditional Santa's Village. We'll have 10 tons of snow. Santa in his skiff will be greeting children and hopefully making their wishes come true. So between the Santa's Village and the parade and the awards party, we expect this to be a parade of lights to remember. On a more unfortunate note, turning to fisheries for a moment, as you may have heard or may have read, on November 6th, the director of the California Department of Fish and Wildlife closed the rock crab fishery throughout the state. Primary ports for rock crab are from the southern ports south of us all the way up to Morro Bay. They also delayed the opening of Dungeness crab season, which was scheduled to open in California on December 15th, or at least in the region around San Francisco on November 15th. That has been postponed. And for those of you who don't know, there are probably as many people in San Francisco who eat Dungeness crab for Thanksgiving as there are for turkey. It's a huge tradition up there, and it's unfortunate the fishery was closed. But it was closed because of a huge bloom of algae that has created a spike in the domoic acid levels in shellfish and crabs, Dungeness crabs, and rock crabs. And for those who don't know, domoic acid is a planktonic animal that it starts as a diatom, and it ends up, when a lot of them get together, it ends up in a substantial bloom of algae, which creates this domoic acid event. And the uptake of this, we've seen it here in Santa Barbara before, the uptake of domoic acid can go from the forage fish like bait fish and sardines, and gets taken up into birds and sea mammals like harbor seals and sea lions. And we've seen it before that way. But I can't remember a time that the rock crab fishery was ever closed. Scientists tell me, I've spoken with folks at the state several times, at the divisions, at the departments of public health and environmental health, who have told me that it's an odd combination. It's spawned by the El Nino. What has happened is that the domoic acid diatoms like a certain slice of the water temperature pie. They like it like 56 to 58.5 degrees, which would be not a problem for Oregon and Washington, where those fisheries have been closed too. They've even closed the razor clam fishery up in Washington. Problem is the 56 to 58 degree water. They're usually 52, 53 degrees. So now they've got 56, 58 degree water, which we would consider normal down here, but up there it's very warm, and so they've been affected by this rather large algae bloom of this diatom, and so they have fisheries closed as well. And this is, as much as we'd like to see the fisheries reopen down here, the crab fishery is about a $2 million fishery to the fishermen, and it affects at least a dozen, if not 15 full-time crab fishermen down here. And it affects processors, producers, retailers, right up the chain. I think it's important for us all to remember that public health is our number one concern. And samples are being sent up on a routine basis up to the state, and they're being analyzed. And the officials up there tell us they're very hopeful that we get a turnaround in this not too long from now, and the fishery can be cleared to reopen again. So that, Mr. Chair, concludes my report for this evening, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Cronman? I just have one, Mick. Did you say you don't recall them ever having to close the rock crab fishery before? This
Mr.
is
Chair,
the first time?
that's correct. To my knowledge, that's correct.
Okay.
I work off of discussions with the state and with local fishermen, and the folks at the state don't have information going back a certain ways, but nobody can remember this at least back to the 1950s or 60s.
Okay. Thank you. And thank you for your report, Mick.
You're welcome. And I apologize. I meant to put this slide up when I was talking about the Parade of Lights. This is the poster for this year's Parade of Lights, and you can see how it reflects the theme that we're advancing. And we would really encourage boaters to participate. We think it's going to be a very, very special night. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Saw that poster and the flag downstairs in the display.
Yes, you did. Dominique's work again.
Outstanding.
Thank you.
Thank you. That takes us to item 6 and new business. All right, Jeanette.
Item 6, drawing to augment slip lottery list. Recommendation that the Harbor Commission Chair draw 50 names from submitted lottery participation requests, ranking them in the order they are drawn.
Okay. Mr. Cromman, do you want to explain the process
Sure,
and what this
of course.
is about?
Mr. Chair and Commissioners, I need to make one thing very clear from the outset, because as you'll hear in a minute, we had 237 people file participation request slips for this. The good news is you're only going to draw 50 tonight. This is not a drawing for a slip permit in Santa Barbara Harbor. I'm going to repeat it. This is not a lottery drawing for a slip permit in Santa Barbara Harbor. I'm going to read to you my staff report, deliver my staff report, and hopefully that will make it abundantly clear what I've explained before, which is what was on the participation request form, and what's been generally advanced to the public is why we're here to have this drawing tonight. So, the Santa Barbara Municipal Code provides that when slips become available or revert to city control, and they are not assigned via the department's master waiting list or submaster waiting list, they shall be assigned to applicants on a lottery list. Now, what are the master list and the submaster list? Years ago, the city established a waiting list for slip permits in Santa Barbara Harbor. That's what we today call the master waiting list. It was closed to new applicants in 2000. Okay, we've been winnowing down the number, issuing slip permits to people when we can, when somebody has a slip permit terminated, when somebody decides to give up their slip permit, when it comes back to the city. And we take that very seriously because public access to the slips other than via transfer are important to us. We have currently 27 people left on the master waiting list. That master list was created in slip size categories. You signed up for a 30-foot, you signed up for a 35, you 40, what have you. And so over time, certain slip size categories have become exhausted via the slip assignment process. So let's say, for example, 30-foot slips were exhausted. We were saying to ourselves several years ago when we created this process for a submaster list and a lottery list, what do? A slip has become available, there's nobody left. What we decided to do at the time, with the Harbor Commission and City Council approval, was to create what we call a submaster list. That submaster list is the exact same people as on the master list. All the submaster list is taking those columns that were divided into slip size categories, collapsing them into a single column arranged by chronological date of application, so that if a 30-foot slip becomes available, we ask the first person on the submaster list, would you like a 30-foot, a slip permit for a 30-foot slip? They may have signed up for a 40, a 51, a 20, whatever, right? They have the opportunity to get that first, they have the first shot at that. And we go down the submaster list until we find a person who is interested in that slip permit. Well, years ago we realized that especially for small slips, 20s and 25 footers, people who have been waiting for 40s, 45s, 35s, and what have you, they'd like to, the old expression from my fishing days was stick and stay and make it pay. So they would decline the opportunity to take a smaller slip, and it was at that point that we developed a lottery list. The lottery list is subordinate to both the master list and the submaster list. It's like third in line that we go to when we have slip permit available. So the lottery list, by city council resolution, is to have a maximum of 50 names on it, and we, over the last few years, through slip assignments or people dropping off the lottery list, because every year they have to pay a $40 re-up fee, if you will, to stay on the lottery list, the list got down to 12 individuals. And so per the city council resolution that's attached to your staff report, we're here tonight to make that list blossom into 50 individuals again, as it was intended when the lottery list was first established. So what we're going to do this evening is, Mr. Chair, with your consent, I'm going to ask you to draw one by one 50 names out of the basket, if you will, that Jeanette has, and announce the three numbers that are on the last three numbers that are on the ticket, and the name of the individual. And you don't have to worry, Mr. Chair, about keeping track of whether this is the first one, second one, third one. Staff will keep track of those, and we will let you know when we get to 10, 20, 30, 40, and finally 50. And once we get those 50 names, we will hold the rest of the tickets temporarily in custody, let's say, and we will go to those 50 people and one by one in their ranking try to fill those 38 slots on the lottery list that we intend to by tonight's action. And if for some reason people don't want it, they drop out, they realize that I thought I was as a lottery for a slip permit and what have you, we will continue to go down the list past 38 and go all the way to 50. And if and after that, we will, once we get to the 38, we discard the rest of the tickets. So that's the idea. And with your consent, Mr. Chair, I welcome you to begin the process.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you, Jeanette.
You're invisible. I have to write on that.
Okay. Scorecards for those playing here and at home. All right. And yeah. Yeah.
Three more.
Okay.
Okay.
Why don't you spin it? Okay. Just the last three digits. And just so everyone knows, I will be calling out the last three digits and the name, because each ticket is named. So with the first pick in the 2015 Augmented Slip Lottery list goes to number 621, Randy Beal. Whenever you're ready, Jeanette. You got it. Okay. Okay. All right. I'll pick up the pace now. Number 600, Rachel Hammond. Number 666, Mike Underwood. $549, Andrew Allen. $558, Jennifer Brown. Am I going to? You good? 728, Diane McLaughlin. $552, Morgan Castagnola. 690, Christine Kohlberg. 582, George Paradas. Okay. 773, Kathy Zotuich.
That's 10, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. If anybody's name gets butchered, I apologize in advance. 633, Brett Grabbill. 636, Rory Gerzoff. 586, Aaron Foreman. 557, Stephanie Muntz. 780, Kari Schaefer. 684, Alyssa Lewis. 705, Kimberly Colez. 682, Allison Brever. 604, Ken Miller. 675, Peter McElliott.
It's 20, Mr. Chair.
You. 692, Baron O'Callahan. 694, Leslie James. 729, Paul Metzler. 691, Corey Broussard. 584, Matthew Briggs. 643, Levi Mason. 616, Kelly Perskap. 783, Brian McLay. 579, Grant Donsley. 580, Pierre Johnson.
That's 30, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. 624, Peter Jorgensen. 588, Dennis Larson. 677, Guy Smith. 739, I'm sorry. I'll take a break. 739, Cheryl Bickley. 658, Steve Bruns. 742, Gregory Arnold. 645, Catherine Dillon. 560, Kyle Eckert. 686, Chris Rickman. 646, Brian Egan.
That's 40, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Good. All right. 640, Lisa Foley. 775, Thomas Sitch. 595, Rachel Wagner. 689, David Lewis. 578, John Berger. Mr. Cronman, where are we at?
Mr. Chair, that was 45.
759, Karen McBride. 570, Leslie Cunningham. 685, Cody Zimmerman. 771, Alice Boyer. And am I correct? Is this the last one?
I believe you have one more.
Yeah. And with the final pick in the 2015 Augment Slip Lottery List, number 772, Stephanie Epstein.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We'll follow up with the administrative side of this. Much appreciated.
We'll take just a second to clean this up. Yeah, do you keep these get Tom? Okay.
Because if we don't get 38 out of it,
Then we get to do it again.
we don't choose from
Yeah, because 12 of them are alternates.
Okay.
Okay.
You want to put these
You
in
you
recycle?
let it. Let's do it offline. Let's wait till after.
Yeah, let's just
Okay. Okay. Thank you all for your patience. Back on track. Jeanette, when you're ready, we'll go to item number 7. See if I've got that.
Item 7, winter storm preparations. Recommendation that Harbor Commission receive a staff report on winter storm preparations throughout the waterfront.
Is that Mr. Triberg? Excellent. This is what I'm looking forward to.
Chair Spicer and Commissioners, I think everybody's seen in the news just about every night the prediction of a rough winter ahead of us based on El Nino. El Nino is the El Nino Southern Oscillation, and it's a climatic condition characterized by increased sea surface temperatures in the eastern Pacific. They've been monitoring this for years. They monitor it every year. In this year, anybody who's been around the water in Santa Barbara has noticed it's about 5 to 10 degrees warmer than it is under normal circumstances. It's very similar to what it was in 1997, which was the last big El Nino year. El Nino frequently, but not always, correlates with powerful winter storms in Southern California. So everybody hopes this is going to be the drought buster year, and big storms are pending. And it's prudent to take some extra precautions related to this with the expectation there'll be some big storms this year. The waterfront's biggest vulnerability isn't so much from heavy rainfalls and creek and river runoff, although that can impact the waterfront, but it's really from the coincidence of large waves and high tides. Here's an iconic photo of the breakwater back in 1983. I think most people have seen that, and it gives an idea of what can happen. We've seen large waves hit that are in non-El Nino years, but most people look at this and it reminds them of what we may be in store for this year. Winter storm preparation can best be characterized in the context of 4 different things: existing protection against big storms or large waves, proposed protection, cleanup, and notification. So that's how we've kind of organized the report here this evening. With respect to existing protection, this area along Santa Barbara has been a place where people have moored vessels for many, many, many years, since the 1800s. And in 1930, they completed the breakwater, what we know of as the breakwater. It looked a lot like this. And this is a 1947 photograph. It's the same photograph that's up on the wall here, as a matter of fact, similar one. It provided protection from west and southwest wind and waves. It was kind of marginal protection under other conditions, such as south and southeast conditions, which are really, really tough for Santa Barbara. But it was the beginning of the harbor, and it was the beginning of the development of all the sand along there, with the interruption of the flow of sand down the coast, and created all the beach and a lot of the waterfront area. Today, it looks considerably different. Not long after it was built, they built a walkway and a parapet wall. The parapet wall was recently reconstructed between 2004 and 2010 and raised up about 7 inches higher to meet building code standards. But as the harbor developed over the years, a sand spit used to form off the tip of the breakwater itself. And in the 1970s, they sort of anchored that sand spit in place. They installed a timber pile wall and then piled rubble all around it. So if you ever go down there, you can see the relic of the old timber pile wall down the middle. And it's done a very effective job of anchoring the sand spit in place. And what this does is it's really provided protection from south and southeast storms. And you hear us frequently talk about southeasters creating a lot of problems in Santa Barbara Harbor. After the 1983 El Nino, they constructed a small extension of a couple hundred feet to further try and reduce the impacts of that wave, southeast wave energy getting into the harbor, as well as large west wells. Large west wells will refract all the way around into the harbor as well. But what happens is when you get these large events and these large waves, even with the breakwater and the sand spit and the extension, it can get pretty rough inside the harbor. There's always a wave condition that's so big that it kind of goes over any of these features, and a lot of wave energy gets into the harbor. But the primary protection for Santa Barbara is the breakwater, the sand spit, and the breakwater extension. A fairly recent addition is what we call the wave run-up wall between the Yacht Club and our administrative offices in 132 Harbor Way. I believe this was done in the late 1990s. The whole area is subject to erosion and large waves west of the harbor. It's been very, very vulnerable for years. The Yacht Club itself is built up on pylons, and a lot of that wave energy will kind of go underneath the Yacht Club. But when that would happen, it would just flow directly into Harbor Way and flood all the buildings, and it was really a problem. So they built this wave run-up wall, which has been very, very effective. It doesn't completely eliminate the problem, but it reduces it significantly. This extends from right by the breakwater itself all the way over to beyond the Yacht Club towards the Harbor Marine Works boatyard. Another thing that was done over the years was, it's a little bit hard to see in this picture, but you can see where the deck of Stearns Wharf has been raised a little bit. To the left, just beyond the picture, is where Moby Dick's restaurant is, and it burned in 1998. When they rebuilt it, they had the foresight to go ahead and rebuild it a little bit higher so that waves would pass under the wharf a little bit better in this area. It's something we'll think about into the future in decades to come if there's sea level rise and those kind of impacts to mitigate. But that has helped, even though a couple of years ago one of the windows busted out in Moby Dick's restaurant, so there's always a wave that's a little bit bigger than you prepare for. But that's something else that we've done with respect to existing protection. And although this isn't really existing protection, it's existing preparation. We have emergency generators in the harbor commercial area in our building and out on Stearns Wharf. And these are really helpful with respect to emergency operations. They operate lights, they operate utilities like the lift stations on the wharf. And the passenger loading ramp on the wharf is operated with this if we ever had to evacuate the wharf. And our administrative offices is our Department Emergency Operating Center in any sort of a storm down there. And so we can operate all the computers, all the lights and everything like that. It's kind of ground zero if we ever have to respond to an emergency down there. The next is a series of things we're doing with respect to proposed protection. The area west of the harbor is the most vulnerable with respect to large waves. Back in, I believe it was the early 1990s, they conducted a study on how to best protect that area, and they looked at hard protection, soft protection, everything, sea walls. So there's a few rubble mounds along there that protect the areas. But in general, they decided to go ahead and construct sand berms, seasonal sand berms. This is a soft solution. It's a solution that's much more palatable with the regulatory agencies. We just finished this. This is just a photograph from a couple days ago. It wraps around the Yacht Club all the way around our maintenance yard. And it's done a really great job. It's mostly good for one high tide and one large swell, and then it'll wash away, and it, for the most part, protects the harbor commercial area. And the nature of large swells is they don't last very long. To have that kind of wave energy to really impact the harbor, it's several days the waves will be big, but one day it'll be really, really big, or for like 12 hours at a time. So this year we have kind of set aside a little extra money, and working with our contractor, we're prepared to rebuild it. There's been years where we've rebuilt this berm repeatedly. We do it a little differently than we used to, where we import sand from further down the beach, and we stack sand on top of the beach as opposed to push it up, and it tends to help the berm last quite a bit longer. So we're looking forward to that protecting us this year. And another thing we do is the boats that are protected by it, when things get really bad, there's some dry storage areas, and we allow those boats to be relocated into the launch ramp, which is protected under most conditions. K-rail, this is what you see. You see the freeway concrete barriers quite frequently. We use those at the entrance. As you drive into the yacht club entrance, we can put those across the center there if it does overtop the berm and get into that area. We had considered placing K-rail all along Harbor West parking lot, which is very vulnerable, but we're concerned that if there is really large waves and a lot of wave energy coming around, those K-rail really wouldn't stand a chance and would wind up just sort of pinballing through the parking lot. So we're going to put them in an area where we know they're effective and kind of monitor how conditions are in those areas. Sandbags in any kind of flood event, those are very, very useful. We make sandbags available to all of our tenants. Steve Marsh, the operator of Shoreline Beach Cafe, is very proactive. He's in a very vulnerable position, so he's had his sandbags up for weeks, and we make those available to the harbor commercial area. And as recently as March 1st, 2014, we had a lot of flooding in that area by the berm getting not washed away but overtopped by large waves. And we had sandbags for all those 117 and 125 building tenants. The city pier mooring, whenever there's a large storm, we take the cutter blackfin is always there. That's pretty much one of the largest vessels in the harbor. But the bait barge we tie off to the city pier, some of the larger commercial fishing vessels, and some of the larger transient vessels. It's the calmest part of the harbor. It's the most stable part of the harbor. So that's part of our operation whenever there's a storm coming, to relocate those large vessels to this location. Perhaps the most important part of any winter storm preparation is cleanup. This is Harbor West parking lot on March 1st, 2014. Berm didn't wash down. This was just waves overtopping and running all the way up into that area. Scott and I were there most of the day, and it was quite a sight to see. It's always a storm that will overwhelm whatever we do to prepare for that storm. So we have to deal with the reality of cleanup. As you know, the Parks Department manages all the landscaping in all of our parking lots, and they have the equipment to do clean up these areas. So whenever we get conditions like this, the next day they come out, and it takes about a day, 2 at the most, and it looks like this. This is, I believe, 2 days after that previous photo. So they do an excellent job cleaning up. And this year we're actually going to rent a loader of our own in anticipation of this happening perhaps several times, to kind of assist with that and be as efficient as we can. Another important part of our cleanup is what we affectionately refer to as the salad boat. Cushman Contracting Corporation operates a small skiff. They come out, I believe it's once a month, if not more frequently, every other week, just to kind of clean up any floating debris in the harbor, and they monitor where they pick it up so we have a good sense for where it can accumulate. This is a photograph from, I believe, 2005. This is a giant reed, Arundodonax. It's an invasive species that occupies the creeks quite a bit, so when they wash out in big floods, it'll sometimes get into the harbor, and sometimes you'll get so much of this and other storm debris or kelp that you lock boats in the slips and they can't even get out. So Cushman comes in and they boom it up and they tug it out to sea and do everything they can to clean up the harbor. But it's a really important post-storm project, is to get all the debris out that we can so we can continue to operate. The SAVE grant, the Surrendered and Abandoned Vessel Exchange grant, is a grant that's given to us by the Division of Boating and Waterways. It used to be called VTIP and AWAF, for the Vessel Turn-In Program and Abandoned Watercraft and Abatement Fund, and Mick's reported to you many, many times on how useful that grant fund is. This is a photograph from the first day I started working at the harbor, and December 6th in 2004, there were 12 boats on the beach that day, 25 boats that year. And that was the last really bad year we had, believe it or not. 2005 was a pretty stormy year. Despite the mooring field and everything else, we still get boats on the beach. And Parks used to kind of manage the cleanup of it, but we've sort of taken over that responsibility. And with the grant program to offset the cost, I believe it's 90%, is that correct, Mick? They pay for 90% of the cost. We're able to get boats off right away as opposed to letting them sit for days and sometimes weeks on end and just getting demolished and pummeled on the beach and creating a hazard for everybody. Notification is another very important component of winter storm preparation. Reverse 911 is done in cooperation with the Santa Barbara County Sheriff. It's only used when there's imminent danger and life-threatening, and evacuation is recommended. The notification goes out to slip holders, mooring permittees, tenants, and the El Estero wastewater treatment plant. We've only used it once, and that was in the 2011 tsunami, the Japanese tsunami. But it's a very effective tool. People have heard about it. It's been used nationwide for quite some time. The other one is Blackboard Connect. It's a web-based application for non-emergency updates. Several slip holders have received messages from Mick or myself related to power outages or construction projects. And we would use it for that and also as a backup to reverse 911. It kind of gets the message out to slip holders and tenants as well. And finally, one of the most important things we can do is have our boaters be as prepared as possible for winter storms. And that includes monitoring the weather, early warning, checking your dock lines, cleaning up dock obstructions, checking bilges, making sure bilge pumps work properly, making sure fenders are in place and secured properly. Sails and rigging, we've all seen times after heavy winds where people's sails unfurl and flop to death. And making sure hatches and ports are closed. We've had more than once had boats sink just because hatches and ports were open and it rained a lot and they lowered in the water line and then it flooded an engine well and those kind of things. So it's kind of a joint effort. It's city staff doing what we can to be prepared for winter storms and also the boaters being prepared to do what they can to keep their boats safe. And that concludes my report this evening. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Mr. Triberg, any questions? Commissioner Power.
Thank you, Carl. Just concerning the sand berm, I'm very pleased to see that you have in place funds and a contractor available to rebuild it, which this could be the year when we have to do that a couple times. Just in general, I realize this is subject to a lot of variables, but what's the range of time to get a contractor back out there to replace, say, 90% of the sand berm, a good part of it? What are we talking about?
Chair Spicer, Commissioner Powers, we monitor the weather pretty closely. And so if we knew a swell was coming, and there's pretty good swell forecasting these days, we'd probably contact them in advance and say, we might need your help. They usually are very responsive. Our local contractors, in this case, Pete Lapidus is who has the contract for this. He has equipment. He's in Carpinteria. He's close by. If not next day, the day after kind of thing. If 90% of the berm washed down, that would be a pretty tall order to restore it. The restoration is going to be comprised of just pushing sand up at low tide and putting whatever we can put back. Right now, the berm is very, very thick. It's really going to be as resilient as you can possibly make it. But it's next day or 2 days after, kind of at the latest. We can probably arrange for that, unless it's a very, very bad flood and roads are closed and he can't get equipment in, or if it's that bad. But we can respond pretty quickly.
Commissioner Webb.
Thank you for your report, Carl, and having us prepared. And you said you were going to rent a front loader, and what would you use that for? And that would be on hand throughout the season?
Sheriff Spicer, Commissioner Webb. Yeah, we'd use a front-end loader similar to what the Parks Department has, and we'd keep it down there. When you get the wave overtopping, you get a lot of sand and debris and all kinds of garbage into the parking lots, and that's usually the major component is cleaning that stuff up and pushing it out of the way. And keep in mind that we maintain all the lots from Ledbetter Point all the way down to the Cabrillo East and West. So there's a lot of ground to cover. Most of the damage is usually at Harbor West, Ledbetter, with less exposure and vulnerability for the parking lots further to the east. But if it's as bad as people say it's going to be, in 1983 they were cleaning boulders off Cabrillo Boulevard, so that's kind of what we have in mind.
Commissioner Sloan.
Yeah, again, thank you for the report, Carl. Do we have a criteria and a process for closing the wharf in situations like we've had where the waves get pretty large, like when and how do we do it?
Chair Spicer, Commissioner Sloan, that's always been an interesting topic because the larger the waves, the more people come to the wharf. So we've faced that several times. In the recent past, when the waves start sort of tickling the bottom of the deck, keeping in mind that what we call Plank Park or the seaward finger is sort of the lowest part of the deck, and people go out there, we've closed that several times and moved people back from that. The last time we closed the wharf was in 2014 when the window broke out at Moby Dick's. We felt things were getting a little bit dangerous, so we moved everybody off the wharf at that time. In 2008, we moved everybody off the wharf. It was another big swell. It's a very, very busy time for the restaurants, and they don't necessarily want to be closed.
No, I can understand that, but
yeah.
in 14, when that window broke, which made me think of it, did we evacuate Moby Dick's and those businesses out there?
Yes, and they
Okay.
did it voluntarily. They kind of knew what was going on, and it came up very, very quickly. The flip side of that is the tide comes up fairly quickly and goes down fairly quickly,
Right,
and the
right.
peak of the swell comes up and goes down fairly quickly. So we wound up opening later in that afternoon,
Right.
but we did as things kind of got fluid and dynamic. It was pretty early in the morning. We realized we need to close, and we did close briefly on that day.
So when that happens, we have, as you said, there's good swell models. We know something's coming, and if it's a storm surge with it, we have people out there.
Yeah, we always have staff out there, and then if we need, we had received assistance from PD and fire in the past to evacuate areas.
Okay, thank you.
You know, that reminds me of something. You showed that picture of the breakwater and the giant wave hitting it, and I know it was just a few years ago that we had a wave hit the breakwater, and a colleague of mine, a friend of mine actually, who was standing back not too far from your office, was swept off the sidewalk onto the rocks there. And I know we have a bilingual sign that we put out to close the breakwater as well when we feel it's not comfortable.
Chair Spicer, that's correct. We close the breakwater rather frequently.
Right, okay. Any other questions for Mr. Treiberg? Commissioner McIntosh.
Yeah, I'm not on this specific issue, but back on phase 6 of the Marina One replacement project, having BMI start the work on January 4th seems to fit their schedule well, and maybe it fits the waterfront department's schedule as well. But I'm concerned about El Nino coming up and really producing what people are thinking it's going to produce, and we have all those boats out of H&I tied up everywhere, in any way possible to make sure that they're safe while the work's getting done. But what does happen if we get slammed by a month or 6 months of heavy storms?
Chair Spicer, Commissioner McIntosh, we're equally concerned about that. As far as the relocation of the boats, they're all going into regular slips. They're going to be fine. I think what's going to be a challenge is if a lot of people want to come in off the anchorage. When we started this project back in 2008, we did a boater questionnaire. We talked to everybody about how to accommodate folks, and so people are willing to raft up. We're pretty confident that we can keep people safe. We're hopefully the project is so far in the harbor. I don't see a lot of delays unless it's really, really bad. I think Bellingham is really going to knock this out. Another thing we're hoping is, in the past, in 1997 and in 1983, a lot of the heavy storms came later in the winter, and H finger is the biggest finger, so we're hoping to get it done sort of right away, and that's when we'll have the most challenges accommodating other people. So we'll knock that out in hopefully 3 weeks at the most. Move on to IDOC, where it's easier to relocate those vessels, and it'll also free up room for transient vessels, and then get the project done, hopefully as quickly as 6 weeks, where there'll be a big chunk of the winter left to accommodate boats. So it's a concern. It's a concern every winter. The last 5 winters we've constructed, we've been concerned about that. But we haven't had a lot of construction delays. It's been quite a bit fewer than you'd expect.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner McIntosh, another thing working in our favor is that we have quite a fewer boats out in the anchorage than we've had historically. It's at a pretty much an all-time low, so we've got less to deal with out there too that might need to come in. So Mick's probably got better numbers, but we've got quite a few fewer boats than we have in the past.
All right. Thank you, Carl. It sounds like the experience you and the team have is all put into place and prepared. The last item on the agenda, number 8, Jeanette.
Item 8, proposed lease agreement with Breakwater Restaurant. Recommendation that Harbor Commission review and recommend to the City Council approval of a 5-year lease agreement with 2 5-year options with Stephen and Sharon DeDecker doing business as Breakwater Restaurant at an average initial base rent of $8,794.36 per month, allocated seasonally for the 4,053 square foot restaurant located at 107 Harbor Way.
Mr. Bossy.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. Stephen and Sharon DeDecker have owned the Breakwater Restaurant since 1998 when the lease was transferred to them. The previous owners who transferred that lease operated the Breakwater since 1984, so it's been around for quite some time, and even prior to that. As a result, the current lease is outdated, as you can imagine, and it lacks current city insurance requirements, lease assignment provisions, maintenance provisions, as well as default clauses. So the proposed lease before you this evening has brought the lease up to current city standards. This is the lease space. It's a little bit hard to see. Sorry about that. This is the entrance, Harbor Way, and straight up here is the actual harbor itself. The area is a little over 4,000 square feet, almost equally split between the interior space and a very large patio. Great place to grab a bite to eat with beautiful views. The DeDeckers have done a wonderful job improving the site, with especially out on the deck, as well as the interior. The proposed lease terms, as mentioned in the introduction, a 5-year initial lease term with 2 5-year options. The base rent at almost $8,800, an average of $8,800 per month, allocated seasonally, and percentage rent. This is our standard percentage rent as of late, 10% of tenants' gross receipts, up to and including $1.25 million. And once it goes above that, the percentage rent goes up to 11.4%. It also includes an annual CPI increase. As I said, the DeDeckers have done a great job maintaining and very much improving the site, and it's doing a brisk business, and it continues to grow every year, and they are tenants in good standing. That concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have about the proposed lease.
Any questions for Mr. Bossy? Okay. Oh, Commissioner McIntosh.
I have one question on the percentage rent, Mr. Bossy. 10% of the gross receipts up to $1.25 million. That's, if they get up to that, it's $125,000 additional for the year. Is that right?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner McIntosh, that's correct.
So another $10,416 per month. Is that right? Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, we have a motion in front of us. I'd entertain there's a first.
Second.
And a second. All right. 1, 2. All in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any nays or abstentions? All right. Congrats. Okay. Mr. Reedman. Oh. Sorry. Any staff communication?
Yes, I have a couple of announcements, but first I'd like to see if there's anything from the commission.
Okay. No?
Okay. Well, as the commission knows, frequently in December we cancel that meeting just due to vacation schedules and lack of agenda items. And so this will probably also be true this next month. So I'd like to announce that Commissioner Webb has decided to move on, and she served her 4 years on the commission, and so she will be not renewing. And we appreciate Commissioner Webb's service. Actually, when I just became waterfront director, I called her and asked her to join us on the Harbor Commission, and she obliged that. And so we appreciate that service. She served on the Dredging Committee, the Local Coastal Program Update Committee, the Marina Reconstruction Committee, and the Parking Committee while she was here. And additionally, Commissioner Power is also stepping down. He's been serving for 2 years. with us, and he's been serving on the Budget Committee, which is our most active committee, and also on the Dredging Committee. So this may well be Commissioner Webb and Commissioner Powers' last meeting if we don't have a December meeting. So we wish them well, and thank you very much for your service.
I would echo that. And our commission is losing an awful lot of gravitas and experience. So, Commissioner Powers, certainly.
Just a comment. Thank you for your kind words. I wanted to assure the commission and the staff that my departure is owing to a scheduling conflict with the time of this meeting next year, and that I love you guys. So it's just
It wasn't because of the pay.
no, the pay was quite adequate. Thank you, Chad.
Commissioner Webb.
I would like to thank you for asking me to serve. It's been an honor, and being someone who's worked in the harbor and has had slips and has recreated, I feel like I knew the harbor. And then being on the commission, I know it now inside and out. And it's a community, and it takes all of us. And I'm really proud of everyone who works there, from riggers to boat washers to the harbor patrol to staff. It's just, you walk down the dock and you talk to 20 people. And coming from Greenwich Village, this is a village. And I will be out here on the other side, so stay tuned as the harbor turns.
Thank you both. Your service has been great, and the advice you've given me has been well received. Thank you. So, with that, I will call for a close of the meeting unless there is an objection.
I'll make a motion to
There's a
adjourn the
first,
meeting.
second. All in favor of adjourning, please say aye. Aye. Anybody want to stay? Okay. Thank you all. Appreciate it.